my first question for you, Miss Euella, is what is a real life Patronus charm? For those who don't know.
That's amazing. Well, funny story. Well, not funny story, but since the lockdown, at the very beginning, took a complete break, complete like cocooning, while the world was sorting itself out, and just went through the whole Harry Potter series, and it was brilliant because I hadn't watched all of them. And a real life Patronus charm is, I guess, light in the darkness. You've got, if anyone's seen Harry Potter, everyone's Patronus charms are slightly different. The symbols are different. So there's like light in different forms. So that's what it is.
I'm not gonna lie, like me and my brother watch the whole Harry Potter series pretty much at least once a year. It's an annual event, really. Like, I don't think you can ever get too old for that stuff. But yeah, I did my
Amazing.
research. I did my research on you enough, and I discovered that you were a real life Patronus. So
Yeah, we're very rare, but
what would your Patronus be? What would your animal be?
oh, I want to say an elephant, the straight up, but I haven't thought about it. It's not very like, sexy. But
Elephant, right? It's powerful.
it's powerful, yeah. And they're just, oh, I love elephants. They're great.
You don't want to fuck with an elephant, that's for sure.
Nah.
But yeah, so basically, I think you are an amazing person, and yeah, there's so much that I could talk to you about actually, and there's so much that I'd love to chat to you about. But I think maybe like one thing that I've been talking to a lot of people about right now, and as it's very relevant, is just what people are doing to kind of maintain their mental health during this period. So it'd be interesting to hear a little bit about what you've been up to and things that you might have been doing to stay cool amongst all the fucking madness, mate.
Madness. Yeah. So I think, watching films has been a big thing for me. Reading is just, whenever I feel really anxious or agitated, or just, when you go a little bit like crazy from being in the same space all the time, reading is my way of traveling. And I don't, I haven't read books in ages, but I'm really getting into the swing of things. Started a virtual book club. So that's been brilliant. I've been making, YouTube content, which is, I guess, one of those things that half like helps you kind of give you something to, focus on. But also, there's also the feeling of like, this shit does not matter. And it's really hard to make stuff, when you're thinking, on the other hand, like, there are some really big problems in the world, and this is not, why am I adding to the noise of the world? So I think there's been that battle, but I've just kind of like dropped the expectation of it and said, you know what, this is not for anyone else, this is just for you, this is your kind of process. I haven't walked as much as I'd like to walk in this process. I've just stayed in a lot of the time. But I do enjoy it when I do it.
I think escapism is super important, and as much as you might think it feels like it doesn't matter. I think, like, if it matters to you, then it does matter. And I think that like we give meanings to things, and I think, like, it's interesting because I heard an interview recently with a famous skater called Tony Hawk, and he was saying that he was doing some like cancer research or something with Lance Armstrong, the famous cyclist, and he felt a bit like inferior to Lance because Lance does all this amazing stuff for cancer research, and I think Lance told Tony that, whose kind of only involvement in activist stuff is like building skate parks. Lance was like, no, skate parks are an important thing for people. Do you know what I mean? It's like that actually keeps people healthier. It gets them outside. It gets them doing exercise. So escapism's important for sure.
Yeah, it's so true.
And, yeah, and I think I think like films as well. I think it's what's crazy is that like the film industry now is obviously on like it's frozen, so it is kind of crazy to see what's going to happen there and when things will resume. But yeah, like what do you think? Actually, no. What have you been reading? I want to know what you've been reading.
Oh, what have I been reading? Okay, so I've been reading. I read Nikesh Shukla's The One Who Wrote Destiny. I've read Love by Toni Morrison, which I fucking loved so much. So yeah, I've read a dating book called The Game of Desire, which I recommend to everybody. Even though I'm in a relationship, it was just like blew my mind, just about how you engage with people in the world. I read Normal People, and I'm reading Girl, Woman, Other.
Okay.
So
4 books.
yeah, no, yeah.
That's mad. I feel guilty. I mean, I feel like people are reading and stuff. I literally, so I haven't been doing as much reading as I should have. I did read an interesting book about the founder of WeTransfer wrote an interesting book that I read. But yeah, tell me about the game of, yeah, it's good. It's a good book. Tell me about the Game of Desire and Toni Morrison. I haven't actually read any Toni Morrison, but I've heard good things.
Yeah, I feel really bad because I jumped on it late, like after she died. So I was like, I'm not a real rider. But I remember a guy actually on the train next to me. I was reading the Toni Morrison book back in the good old days when you were allowed to like sit next to random people and talk to them and not be afraid. And he was like, oh, is she good? I admit I haven't heard much about her, only when she died. And I was like, same, don't worry. But she's great. The Game of Desire is which is by a sexologist called Shan Boody, is a kind of social experiment slash exploration self-help book about how to get what you want and how to be dominant in dating. So it talks you through 5 different phases and experiments, based thinking about your appearance and the way that you smell and the way you talk to people, how you assert yourself, like little tricks you can do to make yourself more sensual, but also how to just find out if you have a connection with someone. And there's a really great chapter about understanding yourself. So they go through like love languages, personality types, attachment styles, apology styles. It's super like mind-blowing because that gave me a really real opportunity to get to know myself a bit more. So I definitely recommend it to everyone.
Cool.
Everyone.
And what kind of what are some of the things that help you to tell if you have a good connection with someone other than your own instincts?
Yeah, well, she kind of talks about having your kind of job description for your person that you want to, your ideal person. And she kind of talks about high interest mates. So those are the people that fit into. Have I frozen? Like,
yeah.
I can't tell.
There you go. You're back. You're back in the room.
Am I back?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know where I was last, but
just clarity,
just went off on a mad one about.
Euella's she's in a basement, but she's made an effort. She's got a Wi-Fi booster, so we're all rooting for her at this stage.
I've got a Wi-Fi booster. We were rooting for you. Okay, so she talks about having a CV, a kind of job description of your ideal person, and she talks about high interest mates. So these people who fit a majority of your job description. She spoke about, you know, like when you're doing like online dating and like putting pictures, she has this really interesting you know, psychology aspect where she says to put a picture of you with a birthday cake, because apparently that's about like celebration, and it shows you in a kind of like in a fun, happy way. It makes people more likely to want to like connect with you. But also talking about, you know, your last picture being a picture that what's the word, like filters people out. So like a picture, like for example of me smoking, that for some people they don't care if I'm a smoker, but some people are like, I could never be with a smoker. But she talked about like eye contact, body language, you know, feeling the closeness, whether you agree on certain things, yeah, kind of how you got a good connection with someone.
Cool. That's interesting. Good connections, like Wi-Fi. So what?
Which I would know nothing about.
So that sounds really interesting. Do you think there's anything? It is interesting how like dating is moving online, and it has moved online in such a big way. Do you think there's any like, you know, negatives about that, and any dangers with that? And have you given it any thought?
I think I've given it some thought. Like, I know a lot of people who have had relationships that have come out of online interactions. And in a sense, for some people, it's a really great way. Please let me know if I'm breaking up, because I'm like,
I'll let you know. Yeah, you're
weighing, it's weighing on me. It's weighing on me
It's
heavy.
all right.
But yeah, I know people who have like come together through online relationships and stuff. And for some people, especially introverted people, it's a really great opportunity for you to like get to know someone like properly before you do any of the social stuff. Whereas like there's, you know, obviously there's catfishing, there's people being deceitful, or, you know, you spending all this time getting to know someone online, and you meet face to face, you realize you don't have any physical chemistry. Like orcs, you know. I think there's a balance, but I think if you know who you know about yourself, if you know what, like for example, what your personality is, if you know that you're introverted or extroverted or ambivert, if you know that, you know, your love language is words of affirmation, you might be better suited for a kind of digital relationship first. Whereas if you're slightly extroverted and you know, you like physical touch, then maybe you're better suited for actual, you know, actual dating. So I think if people know who they are and what they, you know, where their strengths lie, then I think that you can make it what you need it to be.
What's an ambivert?
What do you think about?
What do I think? Yeah, I agree with everything you've just said. I think there's something a little bit. I don't want to talk too much shit about Tinder, because I know people meet on there and find good relationships on there and stuff like that. But like, I think there is something a little bit toxic about like the swiping and the addictive nature of it, and the fact that hello, Euella, you with me? And she's back.
Right. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna move.
You're gonna move.
This is
Go
outrageous.
for it.
I'm doing mental gymnastics here, like trying to make this work.
That's all good.
Right. Let's try something new.
You're next to the booster.
Yeah. I'm in between the actual Wi-Fi and the booster, so if you know, hopefully I've got double help.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better.
Fantastic.
We've got the plant as well. I'm feeling like
You're in a jungle. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Let's do this. Oh.
I like it. It's a nice. It's a good. It's like
Okay.
it's feeling. It's natural. It's like being in nature, you know.
Right. Okay.
Cool. I was in a very important rant there.
I felt like you were, and it was just so stressful. Anyway, can you try and do it again and do it justice?
Yeah. So yeah, so basically I was just kind of saying that, yeah, no, there's a lot of positives to the online dating thing, and people like have found successful relationships in that, and I think that's brilliant and amazing. But I was just saying, I think there's something a little bit toxic about the swiping, obsessively on a phone, and that I'm sure a lot of these apps are made with that, addictive nature in mind.
Addictive,
Like people have talked about social
definitely.
media, like, almost like they're like slot machines in a casino in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
So I think that's just maybe something, and I guess not for everyone, but there is that. Is it encouraging a little bit of shallowness as well, where everything's based on appearance? As much as that's important, it's like, as you all know, it's just as in personality, it's just as important. So
yeah. No, I think you're definitely right. Like I've never really been able to do the Tinder thing because I just get really bored and I get desensitized, and I'm like, there's no way I can ever do this. But I have done the online relationships before, and I've really enjoyed it. So yeah, I definitely see what you're saying, and you definitely get desensitized just to the whole experience.
no, totally. It's interesting. You mentioned, stuff about being introverted and extroverted and stuff, and I think you class yourself as an extroverted introvert, if I'm correct.
Mm.
I would probably say the same about myself in a lot of ways. Maybe it's probably a bit of an artist thing, maybe. But yeah, what do you think? Yeah, what does that mean to you, being an extroverted introvert?
That's a really good question. So I definitely get my energy from being alone. Yeah, I've always done that, but I've never been the type of person. Well, not I've never been, but I'm not usually known as the sort of person that when I'm in a public space to just kind of shrivel up. I get energy from people when I'm around them, but it's like cocaine. It's very high, intense, and then I'll need to crash extremely hard. So it's that kind of those two playing off of each other. Um, so I feel like my introverted sense gives me my stamina, my energy, my long lasting energy, and my extroverted sense gives me my boost. So that's how I interpret it. What about you?
No, that's a good way. I see you fighting with that leaf hanging down there. You might have to tear it off or something.
I know it probably, yeah, I will because it's kind of dead anyway.
Kill the plant.
But,
There you go.
yeah,
That's beautiful.
yeah. Sorry, plant. Well,
um, yeah, no, I think, yeah, the way you put it there is really good. I think there's an energy thing there for sure. It's like you can gain energy from people when being in big groups and stuff, but that also can be draining in a lot of ways, right? And I think,
mm,
yeah, for me personally, I find a lot of my inspiration and stuff does come when I'm alone, and take that time to myself. Um,
mm,
so yeah, I think that's important. I think it's almost important for everyone as well. I know some people are more extroverted, but like if you become too reliant on the company of others, I think it's especially, in a time like a lockdown and a pandemic, like it's not going
not
to
the
be great
one.
for your mental health. So
Yeah, it's, it's difficult. And I
mm,
think, what you touched on about being a creative as well, like, you know, yeah, I think a lot of that creativity comes from within. And then you can then bounce off of other people once you've got that inner creativity. But if it's not there, I don't know. I don't know. People work differently.
where does your what's your like favorite art form to do yourself, and where does your inspiration for filmmaking come from, or what are some of the things that have inspired some of the films you've made?
Mm. So my favorite art form to do, which I don't get to do, I'm not, is performing. That's my guilty pleasure, which is what I do in my bedroom, and it makes me feel great. But I think in terms of in terms of the filmmaking side, I've always wanted to be a bit provocative in the stuff that I make. When I was in A level and I used to do sociology, we'd write these essays and they'd say, at the very end of your essay, put in a little bit of a twist, put something to kind of throw the marker off. And I think that's something that I've always loved. I love things that kind of make you think or have to rewatch it, or see something in a completely different way, or challenge your assumptions. That's something that I strive to do in my work if I can.
And with the Random Acts film you made, which was amazing, what specifically like inspired you for that one?
It was all about this idea of the performativity of suffering, and whether there's any power in that. If you're labeled something, or if you're seen to have to always play a certain role, which often marginalized people do, is there a way of galvanizing around that? Is there any power in that? Can you play the watcher in a sense? And there was the original idea for that film, which I still want to make at some point, was this idea of this massive warehouse of just these women of color, just all working and grafting and doing all this stuff and pulling rigs and doing all this for this performance that was going to be screened live on television. And there was all these families with privilege watching this TV show of this of these really suffering people, where behind the scenes there's this flourishing Wakanda style life of women just doing their thing. And that's kind of where it came from, scaled down version.
That sounds really cool. And yeah, it's crazy with filmmaking, isn't it? It's like you can have like your original idea is often so different from the thing that
So like take it down a couple notches, babe.
yeah, more often just because of how fucking expensive filmmaking is. But yeah, no, that's really interesting what you're saying about the performance of suffering. And I think that's so deep in a lot of ways. I think particularly for Black people, because we are so prominent in the entertainment industry, and often appraised for bearing our souls in a certain way, and highlighting some of the suffering that comes with being of African descent. And there's this weird kind of sort of disconnect with the audience that enjoys consuming it, but perhaps doesn't really understand it.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily have hostility towards it, wants to be a part of it. And it's this weird push and pull relationship, isn't it?
Yeah, it's super weird and complex, I guess. And another thing in terms of like the performativity of suffering, when I watched the Netflix Amanda Knox documentary, just the way in which she for those who don't know, she was on trial for murder of or being accomplice in murder of a young foreign exchange student who was British. And I think it was just like the way in which there was an expectation of the way you're supposed to mourn or grieve or suffer or perform guilt or perform grieving. It was just really interesting that we have a certain expectation, even though we say, oh, everything is all individual. If someone's way of communicating their grief doesn't feel right to us, we're like, they must be guilty or they must be this. So it's
Yeah, and I mean that's funny you should mention that, because I remember watching that documentary a couple of years ago, and like it's crazy, it's really good. And it's and yeah, you end up wanting Amanda to be the monster, and then at the end they kind of reveal that, well, she probably didn't do it, kind of thing.
Hard.
Which is really interesting. And yeah, it's with the kind of the it's really weird what's accepted as a form of suffering. You know what I mean? Like you were saying, there's different ways that are accepted forms of grieving, right? Like someone's grieving might be, you know, bursting out with laughter, or you know what I mean? And to other people, that's like, what? That's so
Yeah.
disrespectful. But it's like, who can tell you how to feel your emotions, right? It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's just it is really interesting in terms of all that stuff. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about, I didn't actually get to tune into this show you did on BBC Radio 4, but it looked like you had a interesting conversation about grief with Marisha Shaw.
Yeah.
Is that right? I'd be really interested to hear
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. So that was a Radio 4 one-to-one series. So you kind of take a particular topic, and then you speak about that same topic with different people with different perspectives. So I got to do 3 different people, like the chief rabbi, amazing. Oh God, I'm not going to talk about this because I can't remember anyone's names. But I spoke to 3 people for 3 different perspectives. But I think the reason why I started it was because I was really interested in 9 nights, which is the Jamaican tradition of kind of I guess celebration of life, but also the grief process, the cultural grief process in Jamaica. And you know, it's really, you know, I've always loved 9 nights, because I just feel like it's a brilliant way to send somebody off, you know, for 9 days and 9 nights. The house of you know, of the deceased is open, and everyone comes and brings music and food, and you know, there's space for you know, traditional mourning, but also there's space for laughter and sharing of jokes. And then after the 9th day and night, that's when the funeral is, and then you have like the wake. And you know, I've, as a cultural thing, it's something that I've always loved, and I'm absolutely terrified that that will not happen. I'll have a very British funeral, which I don't want. So yeah, that was kind of but it was a really great conversation with Marisha, who was just kind of sharing sharing some of the 9 night tradition with me, and talking about her experiences. So yeah, it was brilliant to do.
Yeah, I mean, grief is another really sort of sensitive thing, and but it's really interesting to kind of explore how different cultures across the world deal with grief. And yeah, I mean, I hadn't known about that, but yeah, it's really interesting that there's that celebratory element to the 9 nights and 9 days in Jamaica. And I think that's actually something that is probably happens a little bit, you know, across like West Africa and other Caribbean nations and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
And
it's great.
yeah, and I think, do you think, because it's interesting, like, you know, thinking about that stuff in relation to what's going on now as well, because earlier on during this pandemic, I was wondering if I came across this really interesting article about sort of our sort of Western society's relationship with death, and it does feel like in some ways this is highlighting our kind of really awkward and uncomfortable relationship with loss of life, right? It's like it's really put that under the spotlight.
Totally. Yeah, it's super interesting. Like, just the fact that it's really, you know, for anyone to lose someone is difficult, and then to lose them in a time where it's not, you can't fully acknowledge it, you can't, you know, fully like give them the send off that they deserve. It feels absolutely awful. Like, you know, people are just kind of suspended in this limbo, I can only imagine, of grief, where you're kind of like, you know, they're gone, but I haven't said goodbye properly yet, and you're just kind of waiting for the nightmare of the lockdown to finish. And oh yeah, it feels really horrible. But I think you're right, it does. Like, I've always thought that, you know, the Western way of dealing with grief has been very uncomfortable, but you know, dressing in all black, and you know, you can't really you know, there's no like the thought of going to a Western funeral and playing music and everyone laughing and joking and wearing bright colors and, like, you know, telling funny stories about the person, you know, I don't associate that with with it, and it feels like, yeah, it definitely feels amplified during this time.
Yeah, totally. And it is a really interesting conversation that probably needs to be had, and it's like, one quote I've always liked is, don't pity the dead, pity the living, sort of thing. Though it's a little bit
Mm.
dark. um, but another thing is interesting about this whole thing is this kind of relationship with how we live our lives as well, and the effect that fear is having on us. And I think it's interesting because it's like, every time you enter a car, you enter the car with the risk of dying in a car crash, right? And that's something that we all kind of have come to accept for whatever reason. So there is this element of, how much are we willing to sacrifice the things we enjoy in life for something like, a virus that's harmful? And I think that's a really important question to be had right now. What do you reckon? Should,
Yeah,
we,
I
should
think
we all go around in hazmat suits for the rest of our lives now?
maybe. Do you know, the thing that that society has changed so much, and I watch films now, and I'll see people like be like, "Hey, how are you?" and hugging, and I'm like, I've already completely adapted to this way of living. Maybe because I'm a bit in like introverted anyway, and physical touch is not actually my thing. So maybe I'm just like, whoa, I've been waiting for this for so long. Like, let's get it started. But then it's really kind of made me realize that nothing is certain. Like, the things that we thought was like set in stone, like we can change things overnight. Do you know what I mean? So all these changes that we've been like lobbying and protesting for, that have been just longed out. I feel like there's no excuse, but also it shows that there's, radical change could happen tomorrow, and it could be a good change and it could be a bad change. But yeah, you were kind of saying about, whether we should have suits and stuff, and this idea of fear. And it is really difficult because I think it's that thing of like, you're fighting the unknown and you can't see it, and it it might not affect you, it might affect someone completely different. Like when you get into a car crash, it's usually you and the people in the car and maybe the other people, but then it just feels like you can't see the spread, you can't quantify how many, and I think for some people that ignorance is like, yeah, cool, it's bliss. Like, you're like, I don't see it, I don't know it, like, I'm just gonna live my life. But for other people, it's so anxiety inducing. It's like, oh my god, I just want to know what the effects are, so I can make proper arrangements and take that risk in an informed way.
Yeah,
So yeah.
and I guess that's one of the real shames about this, is that the information has been so flaky in so many
Yeah.
ways. Do you,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
mm, do you think
Sorry.
do you think there's any hope for a bit of a paradigm shift with this?
Potentially. Potentially, yeah, I do think that is, I had a conversation with someone who works in at a broadcaster, and she was kind of saying how she was talking to a friend, and they were talking about, the way that certain people in the organization can't play certain power games anymore. So like when they go into meetings, they'd always show up to the meeting late, and they then make everybody recap everything that's been said, and then they'll sit with their little cronies in the corner, and it's like the kind of cabinet, the high mighty, that you can't, when you're in Zoom meetings, it kind of democratizes that a little bit, you know um but then also you've got the whole like digital exclusion, and people who can't, like we've just seen, I've had a bit of connectivity issues, but think of that on an extreme level. And then what are all these places are doing free, webinars and free Insta lives and stuff. And if you don't have access to that, your complete social activity is cut off. Um, So I really hope that it makes us really think about where we want to go and how we want to move forward. I think personally, I think it will have a little bit of a shift. Like our relationship with touch, I'm assuming is going to change dramatically. You know, this idea of like shaking hands and hugging people that is that going to stay? You know, they're talking about like in China how, you know, the use of public transport has dropped dramatically because people are, you know, they don't want to be with people anymore, you know. So it's like, is that what's going to happen? Are we going to really, which could be, it could be dangerous with the fact that this, you know, there's always been a tension between the digital side and thinking that we do everything digitally and we, you know, we never engage with people. We don't know how to chat to people anymore. We don't know how to, you know, maybe that might be the way we go after this. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's funny. Yeah, you mentioned that the stuff about the digital inclusivity and exclusivity. It's like with like terms of Wi-Fi connections, and it's very interesting. Now I'm just thinking back for some reason. You know, remember Jeremy Corbyn had in his manifesto to make Wi-Fi like free for, and
Mm,
everyone was trying to like ridicule him for that, right? But in a situation like this, like, you know,
that would have been great.
good quality internet connection is super important. And
Yeah, it's outrageous. Sorry.
yeah, no, and it's crazy because I didn't even think about that. You know, not everyone has that access. You know, there are levels when it comes to internet connectivity. Some people
Mm,
have better connectivity, some people don't, and yeah, that's really crazy. So, you know, in terms of making everything just digital online, there is this weird, ironic sort of class thing going on as well, where it's like, you know, people in more middle class officey jobs are quite, you know, comfortable. They can just work at home. They've got good internet connection.
mm,
Everything can be done via Zoom. Whereas, you know,
yeah,
people who work on construction sites, you know, are put on the front line and, you know, don't get a
yeah.
break. Um,
It's really, and like this whole notion of furlough, like depending on who you talk to, is either like I see people on furlough living their absolute best life, absolute best lives. They're like, you know, still getting the income, not the whole thing, but you know, some income that if they're already comfortable is not a big deal. It's not such, you know, a big deal to take a little bit of a cut. And then you're like living, you know, doing this and doing that and barbecues and all this. And then there's other people that are furloughed that are literally struggling, you know, or, you know, completely lost their jobs completely, or, you know, or really kind of worried about their job security. It is definitely a tale of two cities here, mate.
yeah,
Definitely.
totally. And it's going to be interesting how that divide persist, because already we're seeing a bit of a kind of like pro lockdown versus the anti lockdown people, particularly in America. Um,
Mm,
but it's also interesting about what you were saying with human touch and what that looks like, because it kind of feels like there has been this slow progression, right, to a lack of human touch in a way. You know, the way, you know, we've increasingly communicate via the internet, social media, messaging and stuff like that. um, and everyone always talks about AI and robots, you know, and this is like a fast track to that world. But I'm very hopeful, like that there's something profoundly special about the human experience, and that people will defend that to the death, you know. And like I know, if like I saw a mate recently he'd been away for like almost 2 years. He'd been living in like New Zealand for ages, and he just got back. He was forced to come back home,
wow.
because I think he'd gone to like Vietnam or something, and he had to come back to the UK, obviously. And yeah, I saw him at like a park, and like I couldn't help but hug him. Like you
Mm.
know, I just couldn't help it. Like he's, you know, he's a good friend of mine. Like um, and yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like it's going to be really interesting to see, because I think that the vibe will be there as well. There'll be those people who are like, fuck it, I'm still shaking hands, I'm still hugging people I like.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
yeah,
some
yeah.
people who are just like completely withdraw into themselves and like, no, I don't want to do it. And which one are you going to be, Euella?
I'm gonna be on the fence. No, no. I'm definitely, I love a bit of touching people. I don't think I could completely um not be there, but I think I'm just probably going to be a little bit more particular about, I don't know, because you kind of like socialize to be really like, do you know what I mean, when you're with people.
Well,
Who
there's a
knows?
health argument as well, right? I mean, it's
Mm,
humans need touch, like, that when whatever gets released in the brain,
true.
oxytocin, or not scientists, but it's good for you, right?
Dopamine or one of them. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So that's true.
yeah. Um,
So, you're so wise.
who, me? You? No, you're wise.
Yeah, you.
I'm copying your wisdom here.
No, no, no.
But yeah,
It's, yeah,
it's crazy, crazy times. And
fascinating.
I think, yeah, no, I think it is, and especially like now is a time where it's important, because I feel like you do have like this like natural caring energy about you, and I think like, yeah, don't think that, yeah, what anything you're doing, whether it be the blogging or stuff, doesn't matter. I think like that stuff's just mad important, because a lot of people are lonely out there, and the digital world is the only way they even like interface with reality these days.
That's true. That's so true. I don't know what I'd be doing if I was like, um, isolating by myself. It's difficult. My mum's isolating by herself, and I do think, oh babe, like, you know what I mean? It's not, yeah, even if you're used to being by yourself, I think it feels particularly, this is a particularly isolating time.
Mm.
So yeah, it's very true.
I think Vanessa's doing that at the moment, but she seems to be loving it. I think there's also a level of, there's it's that, like we were saying earlier, it's that time to take that introspection, and like spend that time alone. I think in a lot of ways, like my brother's got a mate actually who decided to stay in their flat in London as opposed to coming back home to Oxford, and possibly because there was some shit he needed to sort out. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
mentally, like it is important.
yeah,
That
yeah,
time,
yeah, yeah,
that time for growth.
yeah.
Um,
And some people don't have don't have the support system, or don't have, a safe space that they can actually um isolate in, like, family situations and stuff, and abusive. And I remember, like, very very early on, I got a call from Bernardo's, like, the amount of vulnerable children who are going to be in unsafe homes, and that's just like, oh mate, yeah,
hmm,
it's not
and that's
good.
what I mean, and that's why I really like, I'll sort of temper my suspicions, but it's like I really think there's going to be some sort of inquiry, or there has to be, into whether this lockdown was actually like, implemented as effectively as it could be, because yeah, the amount of like mental health ramifications and physical health ramifications, if you're in, an abusive household in whatever format, it's like you really,
Mm.
it's really strange, and absolutely not diminishing any of the people who have died or suffered from the virus, but it does seem to be quite clear now that the mortality rate is pretty low. So it is worrying, isn't it, that like, yeah, all of this crazy like change in society, crashing small businesses, and like all of that damage, like
Mm.
on the
Yeah,
scales, it's a close one,
it
isn't it?
it would be super interesting to see what the collateral damage of this whole situation is. Like, my mum, she works in the courts, and she has been full out this whole lockdown, full out. And she was calculating, like, how much time she's like been working. She works from like 6 till at least 10 o'clock at night, sometimes midnight. She was just like 6 a.m. all the way through, hardly takes a break. She said that she did 100 hours overtime this over this time, and that's guess that's on the assumption that she starts work at 6 and ends work at 10 p.m. And it's just like, what is going on? I was like, yeah, babe, you can relax, you know. And she's like, no, you know. And she really had to have a conversation with her team and saying, like, you know, crime doesn't stop. You know, think of all the people in abusive families or households. Think about, you know, all the people that are, you know, scamming and using the lockdown as an opportunity to, you know, exploit other people. You know, just think about all the, I don't know about this, but the first thing I always thought was like, you know, all the people that you know, all the serial killers that are like living their best lives, because, you know, you can't, no one's checking on anyone in the same way, you know, like we all assume that people are on lockdown, and it's just like, yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. So what kind of stuff is she having to work on then? Is she a
So,
lawyer or?
so she doesn't practice law anymore. So she's more in the operations of the courts, so more kind of like the management team. But yeah, it's just kind of managing the situation, you know, whether you have a jury in, do you not have a jury in, what courts are open, what courts aren't. Oh, if a court's been contaminated, you have to close it for cleaning, all this stuff, like, yeah, and just kind of, yeah, it's a lot. So I think her blood pressure has been high this whole lockdown.
Yeah, it's deep as well, isn't it? Because it's like you're saying, and as we mentioned earlier, it's like some people are living their best life on the furlough right now,
Yeah,
and so like
that's why.
like Simon, for example, was like he was having to work intensely from home. Like it was like mad stress, and like
This
you
is the
forget that a
thing.
lot of people are like their jobs have almost become more stressful because they're having to do all of this stuff at home.
Yeah,
Um, and for loads of reasons, working at home isn't great as well because you're in a different mindset. Part of the point of an office is you kind of leave that home space, you know, and then
yeah.
you return home to your little escape. But yeah, and then some people are furloughed and they've extended that to October, so it's all crazy. It's all crazy.
So crazy.
Um, but
Super
yeah,
crazy.
thank you for talking to me today, Euella. It's good fun and always good to hear your
Fun.
wisdom on these things.
Yeah, it's been great as usual. I love what you do, and I'm here to support in any way I can.
Thank you so much. All right, take care of yourself, yeah? Stay
Yeah, of
safe
course.
and all of that.
And stay alert.
Stay, oh shit, it's changed now. Stay alert. Fucking Boris, mate. What a twat. and on that
Always, man.
and on that point, all right,
See
take care.
see you
See you
later.
later.
Bye.